Hello, everyone. So glad you're here today. We have a real treat today. Carla Crossno, I am a huge fan. She's got an excellent presentation. I think you're going to have so many takeaways. It's chock full of info, and Carla is awesome. I've known her for years, and I'm a big fan of hers. So I think you guys are going to enjoy it. Volunteers, we all know, crucial to United Way's success. And I think she's going to, again, give you a lot of takeaways to help you. And I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Carla.
Okay, everybody, I'm setting my timer so I don't go long. So let me just click, okay, my timer is set. Now I'm going to share my screen. Great to be with all of you today. Okay, so I just admit from the start that I'm going to unload a whole bunch of information on you guys and encourage you if, like Carol said, I'm going to pause at a couple of points during the presentation. Please put your questions in the chat. Eve will help me manage that. And then just know you're going to get this presentation. There's a couple of appendices because that's who I am. And we're probably not going to get to them during our talk, but it will just be for your reference. And you should always feel free to reach out to me directly afterward if you ever want to talk about any more of these topics in depth. But just to get started so that I maintain my time here, I just wanted to say that the first sentence of the program description about building greater confidence in managing and launching plan giving programs, I thought was really awesome because that's really an excellent goal for anything, right? All of us want to build greater confidence in anything that we're doing. And we can all use more confidence. We can all help each other get more confidence. And so I think that's a really great goal. And so, just by way of background, just so you know, I led marketing and communications at United Way of Miami. And I also served as VP of development there, leading our endowment and plan giving and our women's leadership, which was our women's affinity group. So I have lots of thoughts on the topic today, thus how much content is here. But the presentation that follows is just really all the actual plans or documents that I used during my time and represents the practice that we had. And so none of this is theoretical or my advice based on a whole bunch of reading that I've done. These are all things that I did. And so I just wanted to provide that information and background. So I've been in the trenches where you are or have been. And also just wanted to let you know that now I do have a consulting business and primarily serve as an interim or fractional leader. And presently am the fractional chief marketing officer of the Health Foundation of South Florida, which is about a $200 million endowment that invests about $10 million a year into health equity projects in South Florida. And so, with that, we're going to do a quick little survey. Carol's going to launch it to get a little bit of understanding of where you are in your plan giving program. And nowhere is fine. I think that's the no plan giving answer at the start. Okay, that's super helpful. So thanks to everybody. So it looks like at least half of our folks today do not have a program. And so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll there and just know that, so maybe Carol, okay, I guess it worked. Um, that is helpful just to understand where everybody is with their program. So again, I just letting everybody know that these are the topics we're going to cover. It's a lot, and I'm going to go through this as fast as I can. But just know that I'll pause after each two sections for any questions that you have, and so we'll just get started. So I think that today I just wanted to clarify that I'm going to describe these six essential elements of a plan giving program from my experience, right? But the presentation is not going to cover some of the aspects of starting a plan giving program, like the preliminary work you need to do with your board and colleagues internally to move forward with a plan giving program, nor am I going to cover any of the policies. So, like a gift acceptance policy or donor agreements. And so, there may have been other presentations this year about those topics. If not, maybe we could do one somewhere down the line. But I just want to let you know from an expectation
Yes, hold on.
setting standpoint, I'm not going to go into any of those agreements. And so, these are the six
There's
topics.
something
I'm going to
wrong
go
with
ahead and
my
just
audio. So I
launch.
did,
go ahead and just get started with this and just know that each of these topics I'm going to cover through four filters, which you'll see and will make a little bit more sense. And I'll stop for questions after moves management if you'll just put those in the chat. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start with is the United Way Loyal Contributor Program. So many of you know that longevity of giving is more highly correlated to state and planned gifts than the size, the annual size of gifts. And so someone who's given to you for 10 years is more likely to make a planned or endowment gift than someone who's given you $5,000 one time, just to put a fine point on that. And so at United Way Miami, we launched our loyal contributor program during the 2008 recession. I had started early in 2008, and as you may recall, there was a financial market crisis in that year. And so there was a lot of consternation within our organization about how we felt going out during our campaign with, kind of the aggressive solicitations for contributions, which obviously we know we have to do our campaign, but we really wanted to also focus on and extending gratitude to the folks that had been giving to our United Way for 10 or more years was the criteria that we established. And it was really just a way to stay in touch with our donors and to express gratitude for their history of support. And we just bestowed a little red feather pin, which for those of you that know, many United Ways used to be community chests. And the red feather was an iconic element of community chests. And so we used that little, it was a 79-cent pin that I bought from United Way Worldwide. And we started our program with 3,000 loyal contributors, which grew to 25,000 just in 3 short years. And the program featured donor stories focused on the folks that have been giving for 10 or more years, and many times represented generational engagement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about families in just a minute. So here's my the filters, the 4 filters I'm going to reflect on for each of the 6 categories. So prospecting, we all know prospecting is a really important part of any development work. And so if you think about prospecting in the context of a loyal contributor program, how can you incorporate asking about years of giving in all of your donor meetings? So again, not just about asking for a renewal or an additional gift from a donor, but just really getting into the how many years you've been giving if your technology system doesn't have that for a particular donor, and why. That really opens the door to the why, which is really a great conversation. Marketing and recognition is really important, right, for all of this work. And so thinking about what can you add to a loyal contributor toolkit. We had a red feather. We did recognition at every campaign event for loyal contributors. We put it in talking points. And so what could your loyal contributor toolkit look like? So you do have something, even if you're starting from scratch with your Plan Giving program. And so just know that there's something of value that you can convey from a marketing or recognition standpoint. Also, we all know that we have key stakeholders. If we're running workplace campaigns, a lot of times it's whoever our main contact is at these campaign organizations. You know what I can tell you from having done this for a long time with United Way Miami is that very few things were loved as much by the representatives at campaigns than the loyal contributor program. So back in the day, we were putting up, a poster on foam board on an easel with the list of all the loyal contributors from that particular company. People felt great about that. People were taking pictures with the sign. And so it's really just a feel good program. And so just think about which of your stakeholders can help you with loyal contributor recognition. And then leveraging volunteers. And so volunteers are such an essential element of any United Way work. And so think about which of your loyal contributors will tell you your story. That kind of goes back to the first question when you're meeting with folks and asking them how long have they been giving and why do they support United Way. That's really a story seeking culture that you're developing by asking some of those questions. And your loyal contributors, many of them will want to tell you why, right? And so thinking about those stories, which are just fuel to how you can continue to grow your loyal contributor program. Okay. The next topic, moves management. And so this is nearly impossible to read, right? I grant you that. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit on it, just so you can see a little bit more about what I'm talking about. So, United Way Miami had six families that had the longest and most meaningful financial connections to United Way Miami. And for each, we had very detailed action plans, moves that we were doing with each of these families. Of course, you could automate this in Razor's Edge or Salesforce or, any tool that you use to kind of keep track of the ways in which you're engaging your supporters. Um, but listen, for those of you that still love an Excel spreadsheet like me, this is how we managed the top prospects. And the most important thing about this isn't how you track it. So don't get bogged down on whether you have Excel or whether you need to get a new technology tool or whatever. The most important things are the strategic conversations that you have with your colleagues and key volunteers about the moves that matter most to the prospects that matter most to you, and then the execution of those moves. And so, just using this first donor as an example, we had very specific things we were doing at very specific timeframes to try to continue to move our relationship with her. And so again, it's about moving a relationship, and it's just about what are the most important things for that particular donor at that particular time. So again, the sort of action item here is just really to determine what your cultivation actions might be. And we had, just so you understand what our execution looked like, we had monthly meetings with our CEO, our SVP of Community Investments and Fundraising, which was the same person at the time, and the lady who ran our Tocqueville Society. So we would sit down every month and we would talk about these particular families and about the cultivation actions that we had upcoming, whether it was an advocacy trip that was planned, whether it was a luncheon for our women's leadership group, whatever it might be. And we articulated what our moves were for each of those folks during those meetings. And so these were very frequent conversations that we had to just make sure that we were being strategic. And so, really, kind of the questions that I would look at if I was starting from scratch or trying to augment a program, and I was looking at it from a prospecting standpoint, I would just think about how you might use one prospect to cultivate another. And the example that I give is that we had, again, six families that we were trying to work through very detailed moves. And because these were multi-million-dollar prospects for our plan giving and endowment program. And there was a matriarch of one of these six families that was a key right person for several of the other families. And so just thinking about how their engagement with each other at your United Way or in the broader community might influence how they might advance their relationships within your United Way. And then I think it's both a combination of recognition opportunities and engagement opportunities that you have. And so you're going to sort of inventory what you have, right? Wherever you are, you have something. And just thinking about how those engagement opportunities or recognition opportunities, how those might have value for the folks that you're trying to cultivate. And then beyond how your top prospects might interact with each other, there's definitely key influencers, whether it's a stakeholder that's a community collaborator of yours, or in the leveraging volunteers category, maybe you have board members or campaign cabinet members who are going to be key right people in moving these prospect conversations along to the next action. And so just thinking about who you have, how they might engage, and with again, the goal of just strategic conversations that involve the right people and actions that further develop a meaningful relationship to your United Way. Okay, we are at our first pause. Eve, do we have any questions about anything thus far that we need to address?
I do not, but feel free to put them in the chat if anybody has any.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving. We can catch them after the next two. Okay, so the next category of engagement, the next category is engagement opportunities, and I think that for for us, United Way Miami had an organization that we worked with a lot to help us create corporate volunteer projects for the places where we ran campaigns, and it was called Hands on Miami. And during the time I was coming into the marketing leadership role, the Hands on Miami organization had shut down. And so we really didn't have a kind of our community engagement partner, the partner that was helping us do large scale volunteer projects any longer. And so I created a volunteer engagement team within my department at United Way. And we really were trying to understand what we needed to be able to offer sort of a full service, if you will, engagement opportunities to both individuals that were volunteers and donors and organizations where we had relationships, where we ran campaigns and the like. And this was just the way it worked for me. You don't have to organize. I'm a super visual person. I like to put things in grids and in spreadsheets and things like that so I can take a look. And so I can help use those visuals to tell the story of what we're trying to accomplish. And for us at the time, what made sense was to look at our engagement opportunities along two axes. On the y-axis, how transactional an engagement opportunity was versus relational. And on the X, how episodic or ongoing the nature of the program was. And I think, or the engagement opportunity was. And I think, again, it doesn't have to look like this, but it should look like something. I mean, just having an inventory and understanding what you have to offer people as ways to get involved is really important. And so my recommendation to you is find a way to visually depict the engagement opportunities that you have and find a way to incorporate some kind of recognition at each event, whatever that looks like. Maybe you have talking points that you provide to a key volunteer that's kicking off the service project. Maybe your CEO does it. Maybe you do it. And so just finding a way to incorporate some recognition beyond the organization that's helping you with the volunteer project. Can you recognize loyal contributors in those sessions? Is there something that you can do to make sure that your engagement opportunities provide not only a way for folks to connect with your mission, but also a way to demonstrate appreciation? So again, sort of like the questions that I would go through if I was starting a new program or trying to augment a program is, again, how to use every engagement opportunity to its maximum prospecting value. And that looks like, you know, what you think it is. So if you know that you're doing a volunteer project and it's like an art project, and there's a couple of families that you're really trying to cultivate the next generation, reach out to those families and tell them to bring their children, right? And so, how can you make sure that these engagement opportunities help you accomplish key planned and endowment fundraising objectives, right? You look at it, how can you bring in a next generation? How can you ensure that your key volunteers are bringing another person who you want to acquaint with your mission, right? So use these engagement opportunities for prospecting. And then also, again, like I mentioned, find a way to recognize donors and volunteers. And it doesn't have to just be donors. I advocate for acknowledging volunteers extensively. So if the leader of your women's leadership group or the chair of your finance committee on your board is at a volunteer activity, make sure to call them out. Everybody loves to be thanked for the way in which they're engaging with your organization. And then again, we did spend a lot of time thinking about who we needed to invite. We did have the moves for these top six families, but we also had moves for our Tocqueville Society broadly. And so we were always thinking about how can we get people to things so they can feel the mission, so they can see the other folks that are getting involved, because that's what you really want to do, right? You want to provide opportunities for people to see themselves as part of the change that you and your United Way are trying to make. And these engagement opportunities are a really great way to do that, help people see themselves in your mission. And then, whether you choose to use a grid like I just showed you that we had used, or some other way to identify what volunteer engagement opportunities you need, figure out what you have and then what gaps that means you have, and then look at how your volunteers might help you fill those gaps, right? And so we all know that it feels great to hear from somebody and they're not asking us for money, right? They're asking us for advice or they're asking us to do something other than make a financial contribution. And so, if you need a way to engage other donors, I mean, you've all probably done this, right? You reach out to a volunteer and ask him or her to host a lunch, right, at their place of business for other folks that you want to make sure to acquaint with your mission work. And so again, figure out what you have. You're going to do your assessment of the engagement assets that you have, and then figure out where your gaps are. And once you know where your gaps are, you have a great opportunity to engage some additional volunteers in closing some of those gaps. Okay, so I think that tracking progress is really, really important for planned giving programs, because the outcomes of a successful planned giving program are not as obvious always as the outcomes of a successful annual giving campaign. And what I mean by that is that when someone writes you $1,000 check to be in your leadership giving society, you can put that check in the bank, right? And your CFO notes it, and you've got that money in the bank. But for a planned giving program, it takes a longer period of cultivation to convert a donor from a uh, to convert a donor that you want to make a planned gift, right? And so we were big advocates for tracking um, activities, right? And so planned giving programs very often evaluate activity metrics versus just gifts in metrics, right? And so we wanted a way to be sure that we could make the case to our donors, excuse me, to our volunteers, like our board and our endowment committee, that we were making progress, and that we could to demonstrate the same to our staff leaders to make sure they understood that this was worth investing in, that having a planned giving program, building an endowment was something worth investing in. And so these are just what we tracked, right? And it doesn't have to be this, but you do need to make sure that you are in a dialogue with whoever you report to, whether that's a key volunteer, your VP of development, your CEO. If you're the executive director or CEO, then your board is who you're reporting to. But just making sure that folks have communicated what they want to see, so that you are reporting back on what will help them affirm their decision to have moved forward with a planned giving program. And this is just what we used. And, it was a combination of showing what the dollars in already looked like, the gifts that we already had, how they were invested using our investment committee's policies, what gifts had been committed but not realized yet. And then you can see we tracked all the meetings that we had. We tracked the number of loyal contributors that we recognized. We tracked the number of donors that were exposed to planned gift messaging through our newsletter. And then one of the most important ways that we sort of built a culture around our planned giving program was by really engaging the development officers that were responsible for each of our campaign divisions. And so our United Way was organized by division: finance division, travel and hospitality division, the county, the Miami-Dade County Public Schools. And we tried to ensure that each of the development officers knew that we were looking for stories and ways to recognize our loyal contributors, and that we use that input that we were receiving from our colleagues to again report on our progress with our planned giving program. Because this is, again, you're doing your storytelling, right? You're telling the story of your planned giving program. And so you just have to find a way to do that. And so my recommendation is just make sure that you know what activities have the maximum prospecting value and should be tracked, whether that's meetings with donors, meetings with professional advisors, and that you know what recognition activities you need to be doing and tracking. And then make sure that you're in close contact with your finance and IT team so that you can assemble the details about the dollars you've already raised and how you can tell that story visually. And then again, like I said, making sure that your development officer colleagues or your Tocqueville Society colleagues are reporting back so that you can provide that information as part of the dashboard that you're communicating regarding the progress of your plan giving program. Okay, Eve, any questions?
Yes, we do have a question, and the question was about the families that you were talking about. And the
Yes,
question was, were the families, this is from Alan, were the six families already United Way donors, or did you develop them from the community?
that's a great question. So all of the families were United Way donors at some level, and but it was a wide variety of levels of engagement across the families. So there was one family that had made some commitment. Um, in the past, but had not been involved for very long. And there was another family who we were in well into the second generation of engagement. And the mom had really been one of the founders of the Tocqueville Society and Million Dollar Roundtable and Women's Leadership Group. And so we had everything from a family that had, decades of intense engagement to a family that had made a substantial gift and hosted a Tocqueville Society annual gathering. And so they were not unknown to the United Way. But there were just different levels of how much we needed to communicate about our mission work and how much we needed to engage them. And that's why the activities for them differed so substantially. Anything else? Any other questions, Eve?
No,
Okay,
no. Good
great.
question.
Okay, yeah, great question. Okay, so I'm going to move to my next slide. So I've touched on storytelling as a really important part of really your job is storytelling, no matter what your functional title is. And I just share these definitions because I think they're really important. And there's two aspects of this that I like to highlight. So, storytelling is about sharing and interpreting experiences, right? It's a way to do that. It's a way for your donor to share their experience in getting engaged with your mission. And the storytelling helps them to interpret their experience, right? By asking them why they've gotten involved with your United Way, you're helping them to reflect on that, reflect on why this has meaning for them. And so that's a really important part of storytelling. Another thing that I like to just talk about now in the age of social media and where we are as a society, that it's also an interactive art, right? And so by interactive, I mean, we're going to put a story out there, whether it's on social media, on our website, in an annual report, wherever you might be placing stories. And we're going to get reactions to it in a way that we didn't always used to. Like we used to be able to quote unquote control our brand, right? But now our brands are interactions with our communities. And so you just think about how you might use stories to provoke engagement, right? And so storytelling as it is now in 2026 is an interactive art. And so, why do we tell stories? We tell stories to do a lot of things in fundraising. And, the primary one you might think about is we're trying to attract donors and volunteers, right? We're trying to raise additional funds. And I think that um, some of the ways in which we tell stories help us to accomplish some other goals that might be harder to evaluate than just the exact number of donors we brought in a year and the exact number of dollars we raised in a year. So we might use storytelling to recognize funders, right? To recruit new members to our young leaders group or our women's leadership group. We definitely are telling stories to promote our services, right? And to document the need that we serve in the community. And I would argue that the most important reasons we're telling stories are to create connections in right now, which is a very isolated and fragmented world. And we're telling stories to motivate action. We're telling stories to incite someone to do something that matters, right? Whether it's attending an event that we are hosting, whether it's supporting a project that's really important to a community, or whether it's just about increasing awareness of either a need or a program that we are starting. So I'm going to give you an example of a campaign that we did a couple years ago, and this is a campaign that featured several assets. And so I'm going to talk about inventorying assets in just a second. But, um, a lot of times when you think about starting a new project of any sort, whether it's a plan giving program or we already have a plan giving program, but we need to do a better job of telling the stories of why we're doing a plan giving program, why people have already included us in their estate plan. We need to start inventorying what assets we have. And in Appendix A, which you're going to get as part of this presentation, there's really four ways to inventory your storytelling assets. You've got creative assets, right? You've got visuals, you've got testimonials and stories that you've received. You've got financial assets. So you might have a small budget, but you got some budget, right? Even if it's $100 a quarter or whatever, you've got something. And so it's important to know what that is. We also have talent assets, right? And so you've got people. Those are people on your team. Those are people you can access via partnerships or collaborations. And then you have your volunteers. And so those are the talent assets, right? And then I've already showed you my sort of engagement visual that I use. So you have engagement assets as well. And so it's important to realize that those things each have value. And so I just want to encourage you to not think, oh, we're starting from nowhere. You're definitely starting somewhere, and it's just about doing an inventory. And so this particular program that we did was a campaign to acknowledge our corporate supporters. And we had individual taglines written for the top 15 companies that we had. And so we had some creative assets, right? We had the writing that was done for this campaign. We had people served by United Way programs. That was a talent asset. So the beautiful lady here in this image was a recipient of a recipient of a United Way program. Another asset we had in the talent category was a really close relationship with a local advertising firm that had been involved with our United Way for a couple generations. And then we had a relationship with the Miami-Dade County and with the airport director. And so those were sort of the talent and creative assets we had for this project, which was an ad campaign that ran at the Miami-Dade airport. And I just use this as an example because we don't always think about all of the kinds of assets we have. Sometimes we're just like, oh, I don't have a director of marketing, or I don't have a director of communications, or I don't have this, or I don't have that. But there's things that you do have and relationships that you do have that if you're sort of mapping what those are, you can find a way to bring them together to do something of impact. And so I would just say if you're thinking about how to tell stories related to your plan giving program, I would encourage you to inventory the talent that you have, colleagues and volunteers that can be your messengers. And then what creative assets do you have, whether it's photos, videos, anything that can be in your storytelling toolkit. Stakeholders and volunteers are really important for this. As I mentioned, these are the partners that you have that can add to your talent or creative assets and help you make something like this happen. And so these are really the things that I would be asking myself. And, I would just say that, I also wanted to share that I am writing a book. I am almost done. It's coming out in June about storytelling for nonprofits. And I'll be sure to pass that along to Carol so that she can share that. But I've got a lot of material from, a couple of decades of doing this kind of work. And what I would just say, one of the resources that I'm going to share beyond this presentation is a connection to something called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And so why storytelling is so important in 2026 is we're really living through a period of trust bankruptcy, right? Like people just don't trust institutions in the way that they used to. We might trust each other as individuals, but we have a much harder time for very obvious reasons, trusting the government, trusting the media, trusting businesses. And so the Edelman Trust Barometer is just a really brilliant annual analysis that the marketing and communications firm Edelman does and evaluates what trust looks like in any given year. And so one of the most important things right now is the assessment that they did most recently identifies nonprofits or NGOs is the terminology in their report as really important trust brokers, right? We are often a community table where we can bring folks together that have maybe different political views and they think, yeah, they might agree that we have a community problem, but they diverge very dramatically on how they think the solution should be architected or who is responsible for the solution. And that trust brokerage, the notion of common tables where we can bring people together to start to try to tackle this trust bankruptcy that we're living through, that's a key function that your organizations can undertake. And storytelling is a really important part of that. And one of the things that's really essential from a storytelling perspective, I'm just going to go off on a quick tangent here, is that when you're talking about the work that you're doing, I used to, and I did, when I was doing campaign videos way back in the day, like 2011, 2012, 2013, I talked about lives changed. Like we use that umbrella category because, United Way's funds so many different projects. It's very hard to get to sort of one single tagline. And what's really important right now is to not generalize like that. And so I reflect back on that and I'm like, you know what? We overgeneralize. We should have been drilling down, and we had done a lot of research work into our donors. We had done focus groups. We had done large scale market research projects. And we knew what they cared about investing in. We heard them tell us that they wanted to invest in education, and we did. We did focus a lot of our storytelling on education. But then I put out campaign videos that talked about lives changed, and it's like I unnecessarily generalize the message. And so I would just say right now, when we're dealing with kind of the trust issues as a society that we're dealing with, the specificity that you can provide and the impact that you have. And that's everything from talking about an after school program that assisted 4,274 individuals versus more than 4,000. Like being as precise in your messages as possible is really helpful. And I think if you look at plan giving and endowment giving, where you're asking people to trust you for the long term with dollars or commitments that they have down the road, it's really important to be looking into trust. So I'm going to be sending you guys that trust barometer, link to the trust barometer. And I encourage you, when you have time, to dig into that a little bit. It will help you sort of frame up some of the things that you need to talk about. Okay, so I think this is, um, you know, the last thing I really wanted to talk about is recognition. And so there's another grid. I just like to organize things right in a visual way. And one of the things that I think is really important is figuring out a way to recognize your donors, right? And so what we did is we looked at all of our individual donors over the leadership level, and we literally had very specific recognition ways that they were acknowledged. And now, listen, I had a whole plan, I had action plans, people assigned to these things, but I wanted to have a sense for how many people were part of these recognition categories, because has a budget implication, that has a staff time commitment implication. And so it's just really important to have a visual. But I think where you have to start, depending on where you are, is identifying every recognition opportunity that you have across your owned media, in particular, the annual report that you might put out, what you have on your website, your social media. Figure out what you have to offer, which was kind of what we had across the top here, and figure out how many people you need to offer it to. And then just get creative in leveraging partnerships. And so I think it's just really, again, you need to know what you have. So you're going to do some sort of asset mapping there, but you also need to know what your prospects value, right? And, your stakeholders and volunteers can help you fill gaps from what you have already to what you're the difference between what you have and what your prospects value, you can make up with some of the with some assistance from volunteers and key stakeholders, right? But it's important to know where you are and to understand where you're starting from. So this is just like a quick summary, right? I can't tell you where to start because I don't know where each of you individually are, but I'm super big on actionable advice. These are the things that I would do if I were you. You can do this in any order, right? Whatever resonates most with you. But I think, just getting started is really important. You have more than you think, in terms of the different asset categories, and it's really just important to get started. Action is really crucial. And just so you know, like what's coming, I do have like these storytelling assessments, right? That you can sort of do an inventory of the different categories that I had talked about. And then I just have a couple of slides here from some of the ways that that we visually depicted some of the solicitations, and then recognition for a specific family that we had made some high level solicitations from. So that's what I have. Are there any other questions that anyone didn't have the opportunity to ask, or any other way I can be helpful?
So right before we move into Q&A, and we'd love for feedback. So whether it's Q&A or it's feedback from all of you, I want to remind you that we have several sponsors who help put on these programs for us. So I'd like to acknowledge FrontStream, Third Sector Company, Board Build, and Mutual of America. And I also want to remind each of you that if you do opt out because you have to run to another meeting, we do have a very brief survey when you close out your Zoom room. If you can take just 30 seconds to answer the questions, it's always helpful for us as we are developing all these professional development sessions with you in mind. So we seek your feedback. And again, want to say thanks to Eve for her work as our facilitator today and our plan giving faculty member and mentor. We have other people on the call. I think Christy Shepard is here, and she's also one of our plan giving faculty. So if you're interested in someone supporting you in this journey, besides Carla, Christy, Eve, there's a whole group of 20 volunteers who help with our plan giving support. So with that in mind, I'll turn it over to Eve and we'll work our way through this Q&A.
I don't see any questions right now, but I wanted to make a comment. I mean, I felt like Carla, you just had so many really excellent, relevant points. One thing I used to do that I think might be helpful is I just created a 5-question little survey, and that I would hand out to donors. And from that, then I could put the contents into, a newsletter or an outreach letter, or could even be an email. But it's, you can just standardize it. It could just be as simple as, how long have you been a donor to United Way? What's, inspiring you to continue giving? And what do you think, is most relevant? Those kinds of questions. And then you've got this all ready to go, and you can just zip it out and use, how they respond in some form to help you in your marketing and your recognition. So just a thought. Any other thoughts, Christy? You're a pro here too. You have anything you want to add?
Thank you. This has been great. And so good to see Carla again. It's been a while. So I really appreciated the tracker, because again, this work is for the long haul. So to be able to show some of those steps along the way, I just think that's so powerful for other staff, but also the volunteers. I think the other thing is we celebrate our loyal contributors at 25 years. So it's a little more of a manageable, and also it ends up being a more intimate group ultimately. And our party is coming up in June. And one of the things we're doing is we're in the middle of a strategic planning year. So we're getting those donors' input for it. So again, it's to celebrate them, but also to get their feedback. And I think that'll be part of the storytelling, right? As we do the planning, is to hear their stories and their dreams and vision for the future and the next 25 years of United Way's work. And I think there's something with my audio, but there's so much feedback. So I don't know if I don't see you holding your ears, but I'm going to turn my mic off because it is making me bonkers. So thank you so much. And
Christy.
I'm excited to use a lot of the things you've been doing.
Thanks, Christy. No, we're not hearing anything, so no worries. Anyone else? Any comments or any questions for Carla? She's an expert here. If you've got any questions, now's the time. Oh, nope. All right. Charlotte says, thank you. You're welcome. We're glad you could join.
Well, I'm going to comment because we are working on an endowment campaign right now. So we've been doing a lot of behind the scenes work. We had our 35th anniversary, which was our anniversary campaign. The money raised went into our general operating. And tomorrow we're kicking off an endowment campaign to really help with planned giving and reminding our members, many of them have been retired for many years, that they can think about, including a gift at end of life as part of their planned gift, but also that we have a small endowment. We're really looking to grow that over the next year as part of our 35th, as we are wrapping up this anniversary campaign. So I just mentioned that to everybody because many United Ways are thinking about what's next for them. And as you're thinking about the people who have been involved, I mean, Carla, I love that you talk about those generations of families. And I remember at my local United Way, we had a young man on our board, and it was his parents who brought him to all these United Way events. And he eventually was the board chair while I was the CEO. And those family members were incredibly generous and would have been exactly the ideal folks to be asking for the planned gift at that point because we had those strong relationships. So it just reiterated for me some of the things I've done in the past, but even the work that we're doing within United Way Next. So thank you for that.
So Carla, I just got a question about advisors, and I wonder if you would like to address that.
Yeah, sure. So this actually may be where I met Eve way back in the day, doing a presentation about engaging professional advisors at a United Way Worldwide conference. Advisors are such an important channel, if you will, to your donors as they're making their estate plans. And so by advisor, we mean a lawyer, an accountant, a financial advisor in some form or fashion that is part of the conversation that a donor might have about how they're going to be planning the disposition of their assets. And we all are going to leave behind an estate, right? It's just about whether it's going to be well ordered and how big it's going to be, right? Everyone's leaving behind something. And what we did in Miami with advisors is first, we had probably an annual gathering bringing advisors together with some sort of thought leader in the space, someone who had some sort of advanced knowledge about trusts or some sort of knowledge around some other niche topic that advisors wanted to hear from. And so we started by getting a speaker of note and inviting the professional advisors in our community to attend that. Of course, part of the agenda for those gatherings was a little bit about the mission of United Way of Miami and the ways in which we were creating the most impact across South Florida. And so the first thing that I would do is, if you don't already have on your board of directors or your campaign cabinet someone from a bank, someone from a law firm, start there. Try to recruit those categories of advisors to your board. If you do have those people, then those people are the folks you're going to with the 5 questions about why they're involved, and you're cultivating your relationships with these lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors, because over time, what you hope they will do is bring others in their social networks to your gatherings, that they will share social posts that you make about your impact or about an amazing volunteer. And I'll just say, like, when you know the responses to Eve's 5 questions from a lawyer that's on your law firm, that needs to be up on your social because that lawyer is going to share that to his or her network, and that's going to help you engage more advisors. But the ultimate goal is not just to have meetings where advisors come and learn some bespoke topic in their area of expertise, but is to have them thinking about United Way and the impact you have in the community when they're talking to their donors, excuse me, to their clients that may not have a charity where they are completely aligned, but want to do some charitable planning, right? But then you also can think about the flip side of this. How can you be a value provider to your donors by exposing them to professional advisors so that they can learn how to be effective planners of their own estate? And so there's really 2 ways to handle this. You provide your professional advisors in your community with a great opportunity to hear a speaker so they can get professional education hours or whatever. And not or, you think of how to expose your donors to the professional advisors that could help them develop their own estate plan. So there's really a couple different ways that you can go about this. But if I'm nowhere, if I have a board that's got no lawyers, no accountants, and no financial advisors on it, that's, I think, step one is trying to get community leaders in those industrial expertise on your board and go from there. I don't know, Eve or Carol, if you have, or Christy, if you have anything else you might want to add, but it's a really important group to engage.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, I can't tell you how many advisors, financial advisors I heard from where they had a person who just wasn't, connected to any one specific organization, and they wanted more information about United Way because when you think about who is going to help the whole community, it's United Way. And if you're not specifically attached to any one organization, this is the best way to be the most efficient with your giving. So it's important that these advisors know, what we do. Okay.
This is excellent. I did add some reminders just because I wanted to make sure folks knew that our next Plan Giving Learning session will be on June 24th. The link is in the chat. Amy Crowell and Chuck Gordon will be talking about developing your board for fundraising success. It's sure to be a hit, and I'm sure one that everyone will want to be a part of. And then the additional link is for the Plan Giving series. We have a playlist of all 3 years worth of Plan Giving sessions. We'll be adding Carla's to it after the session ends today. But it's binge worthy. There is so much great content. So you, your team, your volunteers, don't hesitate to share that with others who are working in this space with you to help bring them along in their journey as well. So I just wanted to mention that. And before we wrap up, I really want to just give a heartfelt thanks to Carla Crossno for her presentation today. I mean, this was an excellent presentation. They always are. But I know Carla's done this for us before, and it's just a great reminder of the many components to the success of the work that you're all going to be doing. So if anyone has any feedback or questions as we're wrapping up, you're more than welcome to stay with us for a minute or two longer. But we know that your time is valuable, so we understand if you need to hop off. Also, I want to say thanks to Eve for her support as a facilitator and Denise Fleckenstein, who's not with us. They're co-facilitating this year. It's a lot of work for our volunteers to help co-host and be a part of these, but none of this would be possible without them. And lastly, I'll just give another shout out to our sponsors, FrontStream, Third Sector Company, Board Build, and Mutual of America for making this all possible for this community, for United Way Next, and for all of you. So thanks everybody for being here. Carla, Eve, anything else before we close it out?
Thanks,
I think
everybody.
that's it. I also wanted to say thank you to Carla.
Thanks, Eve. Glad to be with you all today.
You
Great
bet.
job, everybody. It's so
Have a great
nice to
weekend.
see everyone. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye.
Have a great week.